How much melodic variation is acceptable in a session? This is a great question that I got from one of my email list readers, and so I'm really excited to dive in. I had put out a call saying, send me all your Irish fiddle questions. What do you want to know? I'll put up a free YouTube video about it, which also extends to you watching this video as well. I'm happy to answer more questions and do more videos like these. So this is a really great question, and it is definitely one of those where I'm not going to have a total absolute answer. It is absolutely one of those it depends sort of things, but that's never a very helpful answer. So there's always more that we can dig into and really unpack as far as, yeah, what is acceptable? What's going to work well in this situation versus others? So we're going to get into that in this video. My name's Hannah Harris. I'm an Irish fiddler and instructor based in the Detroit, Michigan area, and I go to a lot of sessions. I play 2 regular ones a week, and I'm alternating out whether I'm leading or a friend is leading. And it's a really great time. So I'm happy to share my insights here on this topic, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you think as well. So my first big tip for this, and one that I feel like a lot of people will agree with, is that you should show that you know the tune before you start varying. So whether that's maybe you play through the tune 1 or 2 times with everybody in the session and you're just playing with them, you're playing the basic bare bones of the tune, then you can kind of, depending on the session, you can maybe branch out into some variations, some harmonies, stuff like that, maybe on the 3rd or 4th time, or however many times you like to play the tune at your session. But the biggest thing is, don't just like automatically go right in the first time through the tune and start playing a totally different melody line, because that's just gonna throw a lot of people off, and we're gonna be like, what tune are we actually playing? So with Irish music, it is a good idea, maybe even all the way through the tune, just to try and stick to the main melody, and then the variations that you do are just little snippets where you can easily get yourself back into the flow of the tune itself. And my next major tip is read the room. So know who you're playing with and what their preferences are. So maybe you're the leader of the session and you want to create an inclusive environment for everybody and not throw anyone off that is just learning the music. And maybe you are also the supporter, so you're in and you're just playing along, and you're helping keep the session flowing. And so maybe you are deferring to what the leader's preferences are. And usually a good leader is going to encourage experimentation to some degree and not be so rigid. So it's ultimately about having fun and playing tunes together. So the rigidity can get a little bit jarring at times. However, it is also, I'll make a case that it is good to have a set of clear boundaries in place to keep things enjoyable and keep the music good at a good quality and flowing along for everybody. So I think that the question in this case was referring more to the melody. So what maybe harmonies or what slight melodic variations are acceptable and appropriate in a session. And again, this does boil down to who's there, who's playing with you. Sometimes it can be, the instruments. So maybe you're playing with several fiddlers and it actually sounds really fun to kind of get a 3-part harmony worked in. If you've played together enough and you know each other's versions and you can like make something work that way, it actually does sound very, very cool to do that. So that can be a lot of fun, and that can add a little bit of a boost to the sets there. And then there's other times when you're playing with other instruments, so you could have fiddle, you could have flute, uilleann pipes, banjo, button accordion, anything like that, and maybe some variations lend themselves better to playing with certain instruments because each instrument has their own, slight difference with ornamentation. So maybe there's some ornaments that are easy to play on some instruments versus others, and so you'll hear more of that, like how can you vary the tune to sound more like an uilleann piper if you're a fiddle player, and then how can you vary the tune to sound a little bit more like a box player, and it can be fun to play around with that. So that I would absolutely encourage. I think the ultimate goal is to be listening, of course, listening to everybody in the session, and it does not have to be one perfectly cohesive tune where you're playing the exact same notes if you're multiple fiddlers having the exact same bowing. But I think that it shouldn't clash too much. So let's get into a couple of things that maybe could be too clashy. So let's play maybe a little game of clash or no clash here, and I'll walk you through a couple of examples. So right off the top of the bat, one that I'm thinking of is I'm teaching the home ruler as a hornpipe in my membership this month, and so I've had all these variations in my head of how the tune goes. There's so many different great options out there. If you've heard Cathal Hayden's version, he's got a totally different version than you'll hear most times in a session. And so if you were to play just the standard home ruler, it's and I just started directly on the D there. Sometimes you can have a little pickup to go into the A. So same tune, but I did a couple of different things there. I played a slightly different version. And so instead of doing that there, I just went straight into that F sharp, and I added, of course, the pickup. You can also do a pickup that's, I think that last one there is the one that I did on my album back in 2020 for T for Tunes. So there's lots of different ways that you can get into that tune, whether you start directly on the beat on that D or if you have the pickup going into it. And those are the types of melodic variations that I would say would be acceptable. So all three of those you could play. Unfortunately, I don't have three fiddlers or three musicians here to demo all three of them all at once. But if you were to play that pickup and then the other one, and finally you're just going into the open D there, that I feel like you could have three people all play that together and it would sound fine. You can test this, of course, if you have enough musicians in the area to test each of those and see how it sounds, maybe record it and go back and see. But for me, that just strikes me as a similar enough thing. We're all landing on that D note to start. We're getting to that common resolution of, okay, this is how we're officially starting the tune. We have a couple of different pickups and notes to get there. So the nice thing about all of those variations is that they all kind of resolve on that open D. So we're starting on a very similar note. We might have slightly different paths for getting there. The notes all also are around the same key of your D major, your tonic D, F sharp, A chord. There is a B in one of them, so that's a little bit different, but I'll let the guitar players handle all the chord variations and talking more about that. But yeah, just little passing moments of melodic variation. I don't think there's a problem with that because there are so many different versions of these tunes out in the world. You can't always guarantee who you're going to learn from, if you're learning from the same person, if your version is going to sound similar. And even if you do, like the home ruler is a great example for this because I've been playing this tune for almost 10 years now, and I play it very differently depending on who I listen to. So I'll play a little snippet of Cathal Hayden's version. He also plays it up in like E flat. I think he retunes the fiddle up there, but I'll just play it down in D here. And like kind of that little very, very different version of, but it is, if you listen closely, you can hear the home ruler is indeed in there, and it's a great variation. I love it a lot, so I'd love to sit down and properly learn it too. But you can hear how maybe playing Cathal's version of the home ruler versus just your standard, that would clash a little bit more. So in that case, I would say that's maybe a no-no for a session. If you have a totally different version of a tune, you want to be listening to what the other melody players are playing. So a great example, again, I play a lot of sessions with Sean Gavin, and he listens to a lot of older music and older recordings, which I love, and I need to also get more into that myself too. But that means that he has these versions of tunes that are maybe more obscure, so maybe they're from, you know, an older 70s or 80s recording, and it's maybe not played that way usually in sessions today. Not always the case. It depends on the recording, but you can find some really, really neat archive recordings out there and find some really cool versions of tunes. And so I think in those cases, I definitely learn them because I think they're well worth preserving. Obviously, they're archived too, so it's worth bringing them back out. But I think that if you have a more obscure version of a tune, then you need to get more people on board in your session to be like, hey, let's try playing this version. Another great example of a tune that has a really nice variation that I happen to prefer over the main version is Irish Washerwoman. So Ed Rivey has a great version of this. So your standard Irish Washerwoman starts off. Whereas Ed Rivey has a tune that it's the Irish Washerwoman. It's very recognizable, but it sounds a little bit different. So you can hear it sounds so similar, but there's bits, there's enough of the melody, really, I should say, that goes in a different direction, that if you were to play that alongside maybe the more standard version of Irish Washerwoman, it would clash a little bit more. So maybe a general rule of thumb here, and I'm hesitant to even put a actual measure percentage on here, but maybe an idea is to take about half of a measure and use that as your variation and then instantly come back into the tune, because ultimately, like I said at the beginning, you want to convince people that you know the notes of the tune, you know what you're supposed to be playing, and you're not just going off the rails and doing an improvisational measure or switching to another tune by mistake, which we all do. So it does happen. But yeah, it's a tricky subject. Again, it's all depends on the intentionality, I think, and the people that you're playing with. Are they more accepting of melodic variations? I think ultimately you don't want to mess up the timing. So as long as people can keep the rhythm and the phrasing going throughout, so if you're all, tapping your foot along to the beat, anything that you're doing variation-wise should not disrupt that flow. And I think that you can play around with some chords here and there, as far as, maybe this will clash a little bit more versus others. Like there's a great ornament that I love to play that's like, you're really leaning into that octave, but you start with that second, and it's very clashy, it's very clangy, it is frankly delightful in my opinion. I love those types of ornaments, but again, they're quick and then they resolve, and then you're kind of back to where you wanted to start. One thing that I want to be sure to cover is talking about monophonic versus polyphonic music here. And so monophonic, one line, one voice, it's the melody line, it's the tune. So Irish traditional music puts a ton of value on the tune, and you do get people that really value just the single melody line over the group. But of course, we're talking about sessions here, and we want to have multiple voices. We want everybody to be included, guitar, baron, and other melody instruments as well. So not trying to cast anyone out here by any means. So the polyphony is polyphonic music is more of what we're used to hearing. So if you think maybe rock and roll, you've got guitars, drums, bass, and vocals. And I don't necessarily listen to rock and roll myself, but maybe other genres that you listen to, you're listening to multiple voices. You hear that harmony and those multiple textures weaving in and out of tunes, and that's something that we're used to hearing a lot in this modern day and age with a lot of musical genres. It's enjoyable to listen to. I happen to love harmony. I'm probably stuck with it because my parents met in a church choir, so it's just baked into my blood here. So I just naturally love harmony, but comes in with singing. You can have unison singing. The Friel sisters are a wonderful example of, just all singing the same melody line together. Absolutely gorgeous. Love listening to them sing. And then you also get other musicians as well who will sing in harmony, and I love listening to harmony voices. So it's like I said, it's not about this perfect cohesion of every note being exactly the same, and you should celebrate that you all have different voices that you're bringing in to the session. There is a value in prioritizing the melody and keeping the melody at the forefront for sure in this music, and I think that more often than not you'll find a session that is trying to keep that in mind. So it's less of, you don't all play like a basic part of the melody and then someone goes off and solos over top of that. It's more, this is the tune and we're all playing the tune together, and they can have different interpretations of the tune, but again, there is some limits as far as how far you can stray. And I will also give one exception to my little rule back there of only changing one or two measures around. I play with a wonderful fiddle player in Ann Arbor, Marty Sandberg, who has these gorgeous variations that he'll do on an entire line, so an entire A part, entire B part, but he's got the harmonies worked out so well that it sounds very, very nice. It's as if you had two singers that were singing a lovely harmony tune together, and so it just works out really well. So Marty, the stuff that Marty does is the exception in my book. I feel like, he's one of those where he'll play through the tune with you several times, and then a few times into the tune he'll start to go and try some harmonies, and it adds a whole new layer, a whole new texture. And I don't consider that it is improvisational in some ways, but it is still within the key. It's not clashing, it's not going off the rails in some totally different rhythm. It's still very much following the melody, just like almost picking out different layers of the chord. So I'll be on an F sharp and he'll be on an A or something like that. And just a very, very lovely way of playing. So if you ever get a chance to play with Marty or someone like Marty, then absolutely play around with some harmonies. And it is one where it'll depend on who's at the session. So if there's people that prefer just to have the tune and not be listening to, and Marty will ask, he'll say, is this throwing you off? Is it too much to veer away, or is it okay? And I'm one of those people, I'm like, I love it. So it is definitely something that, again, depends on who you're playing with, and it always is good to check and make sure. Another thing that you could do is, if your session is okay with it, you could try recording different tunes, and you can just use that for your practice, and you can listen back and think, okay, so I was varying this measure here and it sounded okay and sounded fine in the moment, but listening back it actually sounds a little bit too clashy, because it can be hard to hear in a lot of these sessions. You don't always pick up exactly what sounds good in the moment, and versus listening to a recording later and you're like, that doesn't sound as good as I thought it did. So it is interesting to be able to do. So I'd highly encourage, if your session members are okay with you taking recordings, then you could absolutely do some audio and go back and analyze that later and see what all happens. So this tutorial is a little bit more off the cuff, just me answering a question that I got in my email, and I'm happy to do more of these. I'm also happy to do slightly more structured videos where I'm walking you through a step-by-step tutorial on different things. So whatever questions you have about Irish traditional music, getting the real feel for it, send them my way. I'm happy to do a tutorial, and I will see you in the next video.